Hey everybody, welcome back to Guns and Gadgets, the premier source for Second Amendment news. And I wanted to do a follow-up, a very detailed, in-depth follow-up, just letting you know up front, this is going to be a longer video because I'm going to show you a report that the FBI did on SIG's 320 pistol, and they were able to make it fire uncommanded a few times. And this has been very damaging since this has come out yesterday while with my wife or for her birthday. It's actually her birthday is actually today, but I made a quick video telling you that ICE, the Department of Homeland Security, they dropped the 320 like a bad habit immediately. No longer is anybody authorized to carry that weapon, and they were to replace them with Glocks immediately. So this is hitting SIG pretty hard here, but I got a lot of people in the comments that were still like, hey, I have a 320 and I've never had a problem with mine. Well, to that, I say none of these people had a problem until they do. I mean, a little buggy flying around here, but nobody had a problem until they do or did. So just, take that with a grain of salt before I dig into this report, because this is a very detailed report looking at a lot of things that everybody needs to know if you have 320s. I have five of them. And before I jump into it, let's talk about this video sponsor.
This video is brought to you by Brooklyn Bedding. Are you looking for a perfect night's sleep? I sure was. Brooklyn Bedding has been crafting top-tier mattresses for 30 years. Designed and made by experts and delivered free from their Arizona factory, these mattresses truly deliver the best sleep ever. From design to delivery, every mattress is handled in-house at their Arizona factory, so you get top quality without all the markup. I was on the hunt for a new mattress and personally wanted it to be comfortable, help me sleep better, be more cooling, be odorless, and be reasonably priced. After a deep dive, I decided to get a king-size Sedona Elite because the Sedona Elite is constructed with several cooling features. Plus, they have a 120-night sleep trial along with a limited lifetime warranty. I've been using it now for 2 months, and what a difference in the mattress temperature. I fall asleep faster, plus the wife sleeps better on the new Sedona Elite as well, and that makes all the difference, right boys? Brooklyn Bedding mattresses do not contain fiberglass, which can be harmful to your health. As many of you may have seen in the news or on TikTok recently, there have been a number of health issues and lawsuits related to fiberglass in mattresses, and I sleep easy knowing that Brooklyn Bedding doesn't use it in their mattresses. They offer all different sizes, different firmness options, and top quality without the luxury price tag. I love mine, and good news, if you're looking for a new bed, check out brooklynbedding.com/GNG or scan the QR code to get 30% off your mattress with code GNG. That's an amazing offer for my audience. 30% off your mattress by using the QR code or by going to brooklynbedding.com/GNG and entering coupon code GNG. Thanks, Brooklyn Bedding.
All right, with that out of the way, let's get into this report that should answer a lot of questions people have, especially like, why is it usually law enforcement that is reporting these issues? Well, this kind of answers that. But know that there have been civilians that this has gone off on recently. In fact, I don't know, a month and a half ago, a training class, someone was standing in line, just standing on the firing line, and it went off. So without further ado, let's look at this report. Like I said, it's from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and this is related to an incident with the Michigan State Police SIG Sauer M18, and this is their evaluation from the Ballistic Research Facility of the FBI. Now, this was released August 30th of 2024, and we're going to go over this, okay? Why am I going over it? Because this is information that people should have, because there's a lot of people saying different things out there. The introduction of what the Ballistic Research Facility is. It's the FBI's sole research, development, testing, and evaluation facility for weapons, ammunition, armor, and other law enforcement items. The facility was created in March 1988 as a direct result of the April 11th, 1986 gunfight in which Special Agents Jerry Dove and Ben Grogan were killed. Following this event, the FBI determined independent research was required to document and explain wounding methods of small arm projectiles, and a significant repeatable test method was needed to evaluate ammunition. Ultimately, the industry standard for small arms ammunition was created and became known as the FBI protocols. BRF supports domestic and international law enforcement agencies by providing ballistic test data, training in terminal ballistics, and assisting with department research and testing efforts. BRF is led by a unit chief who serves as the director of research and is comprised of supervisory special agents and ballisticians. Additionally, BRF has a full-time representative from both the Drug Enforcement Administration and the United States Marshal Service on staff. So now you know what the BRF is. This is the background of this report. The Michigan State Police began transitioning all members from the current Glock pistols issued by the department to SIG Sauer M18s on or about April of 2024. The transition process included issuing the supporting equipment, training each member through a 1,200 round course of fire, and qualifying each member using the department's official pistol qualification course. On July 31st of 2024, an MSP motor officer, that's a motorcycle guy, was standing in a squad area with other members when his department issued SIG M18 fired uncommanded. The firearm was reportedly secured in the department issued Alien Gear Rapid Force Level 3 holster at the time of the firing. According to the MSP motor officer's statement and the statements of others present, at no time was the trigger pressed intentionally or inadvertently. The MSP motor officer had objects in his hands at the time of the event, including keys. The subject firearm, while in the holster, was removed from the member's leg and placed in an evidence bag pending further evaluation. On August 2nd of 2024, BRF was requested to conduct an evaluation of the subject pistol. All right, so now you know a gun went off in a holster. You know, it ends today. We can point to all of that craziness again, but there's obviously a problem, and the FBI's report that I'm about to show you actually tells you what the problem is. No word on SIG from this. In fact, you're going to hear something here by the FBI that should anger SIG owners. Something that SIG did or refused to do. Okay, the subject firearm, it's a M18 pistol with the X flat blade trigger, M18 P320 family of firearms, and it uses the assembly group, the fire control unit, compatible with multiple grip modules offered by SIG, and the fire control unit is a traditional sear design. These are all things we know about the M18 and the 320. It's the same gun, just the M18 is the military's name for it when it won the contract. All right, and we know that it holds a partially pre-tensioned striker. And additionally, the SIG Sauer technical manual highlights that the 320 M18 firing mechanism has designed safety features that prevent the pistol from firing unless the trigger is moved rearward, resulting in the deactivation of these safety features. And what are the safety features? They're the striker safety lock, the captive safety lever, and the striker sear engagement, primary and secondary sear notch. The following are photographs of the subject firearm and holster in the condition as delivered. You can see right there, it's holstered. Next page here. In addition to the firearm and the holster, MSP utilizes the SIG Sauer Romeo M17 pistol-mounted optic and the Surefire X300 turbo weapon-mounted light. It was estimated the weapon had been fired 1,300 rounds before the incident took place. The first 1,200 rounds were fired during the transition course. The weapon was cleaned at the conclusion of the course. The remaining 100 rounds were fired during an open range session in mid-July of 2024. The MSP officer did not clean the weapon following that open range session. On July 31st, 2024, after several minutes prior to the uncommanded firing, the MSP motor officer conducted approximately 3 presentation drills from the holster to practice acquiring the red dot. The only known modification to the subject weapon and all MSP weapons was to the trigger. When MSP took delivery of the weapons from SIG Sauer, MSP experienced dead trigger issues. SIG Sauer determined that the triggers were out of spec and ground off 0.020 inches of the trigger. The updated triggers were largely installed by SIG Sauer. However, an MSP armorer trained in the SIG Sauer P320 platform installed the subject weapon's modified trigger. Besides the dead trigger, the only other weapon related issue reported as of the date of this document was a broken disconnector that occurred in the first few hundred rounds on a single MSP firearm during the transition. Based on the weapon's design, if an uncommanded firing occurred, two things would be required: a complete loss of the sear engagement and a failure of the striker safety lock. Okay, so FBI is telling you that this guy did the 1,200 round course and then on his own, an open range session, did another 100 rounds. It was cleaned after the 1,200 rounds. He didn't clean it after the 100. That doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter at all. Other than that, the dude did a couple of presentation drills, which anybody transitioning to a new gun should be doing, is dry firing, right? It gets better. Stick with me on this. This is a long one, I know, but this is going to put it out there. This is this information that we've all known was an issue. The FBI says, yeah, this is what it is. The evaluation here. The evaluation began on August 7th of 2024 following the transport of the subject firearm, ammunition, and a reference pistol by members of the MSP. Additionally, his name is blocked out. Executive Vice President of Alien Gear participated in the initial evaluation. Here's the part that should enrage people. SIG Sauer Inc. was requested by MSP to participate in the evaluation but declined. The FBI is investigating one of your guns going off uncommanded, and the company does not participate in figuring out what went wrong. To me, that is a huge issue. If y'all know I have a coffee company. If my coffee arrived at someone's place and they open up a bag and it's full of mice, well, you know what? Blackout Coffee is going to be part of the investigation. We're not going to say, it ended the other day. And that should enrage people. Let's continue because this gets good. The evaluation was conducted to determine if there was any evidence indicating the trigger had been pressed, if the holster may have caused the incident, and to determine the plausibility of the firearm firing uncommanded. The x-rays were taken. Prior to any manipulation of the firearm or holster, x-rays were taken to determine the condition of the weapon and for any meaningful observations since the firearm had not been altered since the incident. There were no abnormal observations related to the firearm or signs of foreign objects in the holster as seen below. Following the initial x-ray, the firearm was removed and photographed. Okay, we all know what 320s look like in M18s. As visible in the additional x-rays, the firearm had one fired case in the chamber and had appeared to reset while in the holster as seen in the below images. Following the removal of the firearm and to determine if the trigger had completely reset while in the holster, a coordinate measuring machine was issued to scan the trigger's location prior to conducting a function test of the subject firearm. Following the function test, a second scan was taken and compared to the original scan as seen below. Okay, here it says the color variance from green to blue indicates 0 and 0.0025 inches change between the location of the trigger in the two scans. No significant change occurred, indicating a full and proper reset of the trigger. If an abnormal condition was present in the firearm at the time of the uncommanded firing, it was no longer observable following the complete reset of the trigger in the holster. Trigger pull weights were taken using a Dvorak Instruments trigger scan tool, and the following pull weights were obtained. You can see it's about a 6.5 to 6.75 pound trigger weight. Weapons and parts inspection, and this is the part that people need to pay attention to. As parts inspection was conducted by two FBI Defensive Systems Unit gunsmiths who were certified by SIG Sauer to work on the M18 P320 weapon. The purpose of the inspection was to determine if there were any obvious abnormalities. Example, a burr, excessive wear, etc. The following parts were inspected and compared to the equivalent part from a brand new SIG Sauer M18 pistol supplied by MSP. The parts inspected include, but were not limited to, the following: the striker, including the striker pin, the striker safety lock notch, the striker safety lock, the striker safety lock spring, the sear, to include the primary sear notch and the secondary sear notch, the sear pin, sear springs, captive safety lever pin, and the trigger bar. The initial observations of these parts without magnification showed little observable information. However, there were a few items selected for further inspection. The striker safety lock spring is used to hold the striker safety lock in a downward position until acted upon by the captive safety lever. The striker safety lock is intended to prevent the striker from moving forward in the event sear engagement, primary or secondary, is lost. It was observed that the spring was not fully seated on its post as seen in the below photograph. You can see it circled, showing the striker safety lock spring position. It was also observed that the striker safety lock spring was only captured at the top of the striker housing. A pre-upgrade SIG Sauer 320 striker safety lock was reviewed for comparison, and it was observed that both the top and the bottom of the striker safety lock spring was captured. If the striker safety lock spring leg lost engagement with the top of the striker safety lock, the lock would no longer be spring-loaded and could possibly seize or free float, rendering the striker safety lock inoperable. Additionally, the wear on the sear appeared to be off-center, and both the primary and secondary sear notch edges appeared worn, as shown in the photograph below. So before I show you that photograph, I want you to know what they're talking about. So that spring that they're talking about is supposed to be a failsafe. If the sear loses engagement, that's going to stop the striker from going forward. But they're saying that only the top part of that spring was captured. The lower part was free floating. And if it were to lose contact, then it could fail. It basically renders it inoperable, and it would allow the firing pin to move. So they're finding some issues, but the FBI is pretty good at this stuff, and they dig deeper, and you're going to want to see what they said. Okay, here's the photo of the sear wear. It says the striker pin hook was examined due to its relationship with the sear during normal function. It was observed that the bottom of the striker pin hook face that engages with the sear had a ledge rather than being flat. So is this a internal parts problem that SIG knows about and doesn't say anything about? Do they magically not know anything about it? We'll see more. Lastly, an abrasion was observed on the right-hand side of the weapon on the trigger guard as seen below. And there's the picture of the ledge right there in that circle. And there's the trigger guard abrasion. It says, it was reported by MSP that the motor officer's weapon impacted the ground during the transition program, during the training on this new weapon. However, it is unknown if this caused the abrasion. A Keyence digital microscope was used to further evaluate the parts as shown in the below images. And this is the striker safety lock. And that's the striker safety lock engaged. Sear. The primary sear notch holds the striker, which is under spring tension, to the rear until the trigger is pressed. The secondary sear notch is located forward of the primary sear notch and is designed to capture the striker pin hook in the event of sear and striker separation without the trigger being pressed. SIG Sauer recommends a replacement schedule of the sear every 20,000 rounds to, quote, prevent equipment failure before it actually occurs, end quote. The primary and secondary sear notch edges exhibit wear aligned with the striker pin hook. The face edge of each sear notch has a chipped appearance. Additionally, there appears to be a manufacturing artifact on the primary sear ramp just in front of the primary sear notch. And here you can see that. Top picture, figure 16, is wear on the primary sear notch. And then here is wear on the secondary sear notch. You can see how different this edge is. Okay, kind of looks jagged, unfinished, if you will. And here's the striker pin hook ledge that they were talking about. And here's the reference striker pin hook for comparison. So this is the brand new gun. This is the gun from the motor officer. There's a difference. So is it because they're getting parts from different manufacturers? Are they not making these in-house? These are answers that probably should be addressed. Now, the striker pin hook ledge shown in figure 18 reduces the engagement surface between the primary sear notch and the striker pin face to the face of the ledge. Additionally, the misshapen striker pin hook face may be contributing to excessive wear on the primary and secondary sear notches. In addition to the above parts, BRF staff observed movement of the slide downward while the trigger was being pressed rearward on an empty chamber. The observed movement between the slide and the frame was measured by DSU gunsmiths. All right. I just grabbed 3 of my 5. The other 2 are in the safe upstairs. And what they're talking about is happening on every one of these guns. So what you're going to want to look at, if I can get this to focus. Okay. This area right here on the back, look at the gap if I can get it. If I just manipulate the trigger just to the wall and stop right before it breaks, you can see my slide moving up and down. And I'll take my hand away, but it's going to unfocus. But you can see it's not my hand manipulating that. That's happening. All right. And that's just the regular version. So then let's talk about the M18. Okay. This is the military gun. Same deal. Okay. Get the camera to focus ish. There it is. Same. Okay. Same. And that's the military one. And then this is the Big Daddy. This is my Max Michel version. Okay. This is the big dollar pistol for it. You'd figure they had that handled. I'm on focus. It's got a light trigger, but it is happening. Clear as day, it's happening. So that's 3 out of 3. And if I went upstairs and dug out my other 2, it probably would be happening with those as well. So it's happening to my guns too. Let's continue. Okay, so I'll say it again. In addition to the above parts, BRF staff observed movement of the slide downward while the trigger was being pressed rearward on an empty chamber. This observed movement between the slide and frame was measured by DSU gunsmiths. With the weapon mounted to a fixture, measurements were taken at the rear and front of the weapon when manipulated by hand or a trigger pull. These measurements were obtained in different configurations, and the results were as follows. And you can read those. I don't have to show you all of them, but there is clearly movement between the slide and the frame when you're moving the trigger, or not. So what do they mean by that? But what they're talking about is this. Here's my M18 version. Okay. There is movement left and right, wobbling, as well as up and down. That's the M18. The big dollar one, Max Michel version. Okay, there's wobble in the slide, as well as up and down movement. I just turned my red dot on. And here on the regular 320 that I have an X grip on, same. Okay, same. Up and down play, left and right play, wobble. It's happening to all 3 of mine. If I went upstairs, chances are it happened to the other 2 as well. Additionally, during dry fire manipulation, it was observed the trigger could be partially pressed to the rear and the slide manipulated by hand, causing the striker to fall completely. This was then tested using a primed case, and the striker did in fact fire the primed case, indicating the striker safety lock was disabled based on the partial trigger press. Oh shit. It's going to be tough to show this because you can't feel what I'm feeling, but okay. Everything's reset. I'm going to slightly depress that trigger to the point where it's just about to break. And if I move this slide, it goes off. Inquiring minds want to know. Okay. Reset. Slight press. See if I can do this on my left hand. Oh shit, it just did it on that one too. But when I tell people to be careful with these guns, I'm the one. I'm the SIG hater. All right. Okay. All right. Fucking A. All right. So here's my concealed carry gun for today. It's my 43X MOS. Does it do the squishies? There is play left and right. There is a smidge. There is play up and down, but not as much as, definitely not as much as those. Will it do the triggery thing? Okay. Let's get to the wall, feel the brakes so I know where to begin. Okay. Okay, so I'll press slightly and I'll try the wobbly. And if I pull the trigger, if I pull the slide back, it does. Maybe it's striker fired guns. Maybe. But I just wanted to show you on a Glock 2. And people are going to be like, Jared, you pulled the trigger. I swear on my children that I didn't. That's what the FBI is just showing. Let's continue because now I'm even more interested. Fired casing review. After the function test was completed and prior to the commencement of the parts inspection, the fired case was extracted from the weapon. A digital linear gauge was used to measure the striker indentation on the primer. The primer indentation measured 0.025 inches. Holster review. MSP uses a modified Alien Gear Rapid Force Level 3 duty holster. The holster was modified to reduce the ability of an officer to access the trigger while the SIG M18 was secured in the holster. As shown previously, figures 1 and 2, the weapon was properly seated in the holster and all levels of retention were in place. While holstered, there is approximately 1/8 of an inch spacing between the weapon's pistol grip and the holster body, and approximately 7/16 of an inch between the trigger guard and the holster body. The uncommanded discharge resulted in no observable damage to the holster. This is due to the open muzzle design of the holster, which allows any debris which might fall into the holster to escape. The only observable wear was inside the holster and is a result of the takedown lever contacting a shelf inside the holster as seen below. Executive Vice President of Alien Gear inspected the holster and confirmed the holster was undamaged and in normal working order. An attempt was made by a BRF staff member to access the trigger while the weapon was properly holstered. A staff member was able to force his finger into the holster and contact the trigger. Due to the excessive force necessary, it is an improbable event, meaning you really got to jam your finger in there, and most people aren't doing that. As previously stated, the MSP member was holding objects in his hand when the event occurred, including his keys, which are shown below, meaning he didn't jam his finger into that holster as hard as he could. BRF was successful in using keys, both flat and serrated profiles, to press the trigger while the M18 was holstered. The keys were approximately 1.7 inches and 1 inch respectively, and the trigger could be fully pressed to the rear with sufficient pressure against the side of the trigger only, or by using the holster as a fulcrum. During this test, it was observed that the keys caused an abrasion on the trigger guard near the area of the abrasion seen on the weapon when it arrived. Live fire testing. A. Limited function testing. Following the initial evaluation, limited live fire testing was conducted for function and to determine if the striker safety lock spring moved. The striker safety lock spring was fully seated prior to testing by pressing the spring fully against the striker housing. Thereafter, BRF fired 50 rounds using MSP service ammunition. The striker assembly was removed to observe the position of the spring. This process was completed 3 times. It was observed on all 3 iterations that the striker safety lock spring moved during firing as seen in representative images below. As previously stated, should the spring leg slip off the striker safety lock, it may leave the safety inoperable. So long as the space between the striker channel wall and the striker safety lock does not exceed the width of the striker safety lock spring, it should remain in place despite not being captured by design. B. High-speed video. To gain a better understanding of the movement of the subject weapon and its components during live fire, test shots were taken utilizing a high-speed camera. As part of this testing, the following 2 modifications were made to spare parts. First, the rear slide cap was trimmed so that movement of the sear and striker could be observed. Second, a spare slide was milled to view movement of the striker safety lock spring. The remaining parts were original to the subject pistol. A review of the high-speed video resulted in the following observations: slide catch lever bounce, sear bounce, striker safety lock and spring movement. Regarding the slide lever bounce, during recoil, BRF observed the slide catch lever bounce into the slide catch knot. While no malfunctions were observed during this testing, and then they redact something. How about the sear bounce? Both the sear and the sear housing were observed to bounce during recoil. The sear bounced multiple times and impacted the striker pin and bottom of the slide several times during rearward slide travel. It is likely a combination of the forward striker pin movement and striker impacts during recoil that cause wear on the sear surfaces, including the chipping of the sear face edges. Let's go to striker safety lock and spring movement. As previously mentioned, the striker safety lock spring is responsible for keeping downward pressure on the striker safety lock until the captive safety lever presses the striker safety lock upward, allowing the striker to move forward enough to impact the primer. The spring is a single coil, 2-leg design, and as previously stated, only captured at the top leg location. During recoil, the movement of the striker safety lock and spring were observed, and there were no obvious abnormalities. Supplemental testing. Secondary sear notch test. Because uncommanded firing requires both the loss of sear engagement and the failure of the striker safety lock, additional testing of these components was conducted. As previously stated, the sear has both a primary and secondary sear notch. The primary notch is used to hold the striker pin hook during normal function of the weapon, and the secondary notch is located forward of and lower than the primary notch. The secondary notch is designed to catch the striker pin hook in the event it loses connection with the primary notch. In addition to other changes to the sear, the secondary notch was added as part of SIG Sauer's voluntary upgrade program. So it was a problem enough to change it voluntarily, but not to do a recall, which is interesting. To test the secondary sear notch, milling of the primary sear notch was necessary. In order to avoid altering the fire control unit of the subject firearm, a spare FCU was utilized. The objective was to provide enough engagement between the striker pin hook and the primary sear notch that connection would not be lost until intentionally induced. The inherent issue with changing the primary sear engagement is the change in timing of the secondary sear notch to, quote, catch the striker pin hook. Milling the primary sear notch resulted in less vertical distance the secondary sear notch had to travel, thereby increasing the possibility it catches the striker. But it also reduced the spacing between the last point of primary sear contact and the secondary sear notch face, reducing the possibility that it catches the striker. As such, the result of this supplemental test is limited to the modified test firearm and should not be applied to the subject's weapon. However, the test does provide insight into the design and function of SIG Sauer's added safety feature. Once milling was complete, the subject FCU was removed and replaced with the FCU containing the altered sear. Additionally, the modified rear slide cap was used to observe the sear. All other components belonged to the subject weapon. BRF conducted 10 tests of the secondary sear in which the striker pinhook was placed on the 45-degree primary cut notch and released the striker by tapping the unholstered firearm with a dead blow mallet. The secondary sear successfully caught the striker pinhook on all 10 attempts. Striker safety lock test. The striker safety lock is the only active safety preventing the striker from inadvertently striking the primer. It is the last safety, with the opportunity to catch the striker should the primary notch lose engagement and the secondary notch be overridden. As such, additional testing related to the striker safety lock's design and function were conducted. Each test was conducted using the subject weapon and the trimmed rear slide cap. The weapon was placed into the subject's holster and secured to a table. The holster's optic and slide covers were left in the open position to access the sear as shown. A primed case was placed into the chamber and a magazine loaded with dummy rounds was inserted. Thereafter, a punch was used to manually disengage the primary sear notch from the striker pin hook to fire the primed case, thereby testing the function of the striker safety lock. The procedure was conducted 100 times at both the primary and secondary sear notch locations. After every 10 attempts, the primed case was inspected for primer indentation. Across all attempts at both locations, the primed case never fired, nor were there any indication the striker touched the primer. Therefore, the striker safety lock functioned as designed under these conditions. A second test with the striker at the primary sear notch location was conducted to test the striker safety lock. The test involved tapping the holstered weapon on both the holster and the weapon with a dead blow hammer 50 times at multiple locations. After every 50 taps, the sear was manually disengaged and the primed case was inspected for contact by the striker. The following locations were struck: the right side of the holster, the slide cover of the holster, the back side top screw of the holster, the front and the bottom of the holster, the left side of the holster, the rear slide cap of the gun, the magazine floor plate, the right side, left side, and pistol grip of the weapon itself. The striker safety lock successfully prevented the striker from contacting the primed case after each manual release of the sear. No slip of the sear engagement was observed during the strikes. However, the striker would shift laterally on the primary sear surface approximately 1/32 of an inch. Because of the inherent movement between the slide and frame, a third test of the striker safety lock was conducted. Approximately 50 attempts were made to determine if the striker would impact a primed case after manipulating the weapon while holstered. The weapon was pressed together and pulled apart at the slide and frame. Thereafter, pressure was applied to the frame and the sear manually released from the primary notch. The intent of the manipulation and pressure was to mimic what might occur to a holstered weapon during an officer's duties, such as running, jumping, climbing, fighting, pressing a weapon against a wall or vehicle, or obtaining a master grip on the pistol prior to drawing, etc. BRF observed the primed case fired on 9 attempts, with the primer indent measuring between 0.019 to 0.026 inches, with an average of 0.023 inches. While staging one attempt to allow another BRF staff member to observe the striker safety lock function as designed, the weapon was prepared and placed in the holster with no manipulation. A second staff member released the primary sear notch from the striker, and the primed case fired, indicating failure of the striker safety lock. The primer indentation measured 0.018 inches. BRF observed 6 instances where the primer did not fire, but a small indentation was present, indicating the striker had contacted the primer. These indentations measured between 0.0005 inches to 0.001 inches. The remaining attempts resulted in no firing of the primed case and no evidence that the striker had contacted the primer. Ultimately, in these instances, the striker safety lock functioned as designed. A brand new unfired SIG M18 pistol was obtained from MSP to determine if the test could be repeated on another weapon. On the first attempt, the striker safety lock successfully prevented the striker from impacting the primed case. However, on the second attempt, the primed case fired, indicating the striker's safety lock failed to stop the striker's forward movement. The primer indent was measured at 0.023 inches. Okay, here's the conclusion. I know it's been long, guys and gals. Conclusion. According to SIG Sauer Inc., quote, 5 independent actions must occur before the 320 will discharge. These actions are 1. Trigger is pressed to the rear, moving the trigger bar forward. 2. Captive safety lever rotates upward. 3. Striker safety lock rotates upward. And 4. Sear rotates downward. And 5. Striker pin is released. Should the striker and primary sear notch lose engagement, there are 2 safeties designed to prevent the weapon from firing. These are 1. Secondary sear notch, and 2. Striker safety lock. A reliable test could not be developed at the time of this document to test the effectiveness of the secondary sear notch. However, testing did indicate, with movements representing those common to a law enforcement officer, it is possible to render the strike safety lock inoperable and ineffective at preventing the striker from impacting a chambered round if complete sear engagement is lost. It is important to note that the striker safety lock, by design, is the last safety in line to prevent an unintended discharge, as it is in place to protect against a secondary sear notch override. While examination of the subject weapon did not independently provide evidence of an uncommanded discharge, it does indicate that it may be possible if sear engagement is lost. The disabling of the striker safety lock through movement and friction creates a condition which merits further exploration to fully assess potential risk. BRF recommends that MSP weigh the content of this report with the outcomes of the internal investigation in making a final determination related to the SIG Sauer M18 as an issued firearm within the department. All right, so there's the FBI. Their tests, their gunsmiths, their professionals, their scientists were able to make these things go off sometimes with movements that are consistent with law enforcement. So when people say, I've had mine for 19 years and fired a whole 500 rounds and it's never had an issue, you're not really undergoing the same type of movements. So maybe yours would go off if you were to mimic those movements. So just use caution, guys and gals. Like the fact that that happens is frustrating to me. Very much so. And for those who didn't see the video I put out yesterday, you need to know about this as well. This came out, like I said, from ICE, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This came out on the 9th. And it says the purpose. This memorandum directs that U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement authorized officers will no longer be approved to carry all models of the SIG Sauer P320 pistols. It also directs that the Office of Firearms and Tactical Programs to purchase, as soon as practicable, replacement duty handguns for currently affected ICE AOs, including those scheduled to be issued in the near term, and to provide a proposed plan within 10 calendar days to, among other items, supply an agency-issued Glock 19 MOS pistol and related equipment to include a micro red dot sight, weapon-mounted light, a duty holster, and concealed carry holster to all ICE AOs moving forward. I don't know, guys. I'm showing you exactly what the FBI put out. You know, take it on face value. They were able to make the gun go off uncommanded like 15 times. So 9 of them, the primer went off, and 6 that the primer was impacted yet didn't go off could just be different primers. I don't know. So if it's 15 times out of 100 tests, that's 15% of the time. That's 15% too much for me. I don't know. Well, on the backs of this, ICE dropped SIG as far as the issued pistol. What would happen to SIG like if the Army does that? Or if all the police departments that have switched to 320 do that? I don't know. I just say for myself, I am going to be overly cautious with these guns. I won't carry one with one in the chamber. I won't even carry it for EDC. I don't know. Let me know what you guys and gals think down below. Again, I am somebody who owns thousands and thousands of dollars of SIG pistols and rifles. I'm not a SIG hater, but I am somebody who says where there's smoke, there's fire. And there's so much smoke that the FBI had to put something out, and SIG refused to take part in this testing. That's more smoke for me. I don't know. Smoke for you? Let me know down below, and have a great day, y'all. Stay safe, stay vigilant, carry a gun to protect you and your family, but I don't know. Be cautious about which one you do, I guess. Take care, y'all. Crazy.